Hey everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to the Old West Archive. If you enjoy true and fascinating Wild West stories, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's jump into today's story.
She rubbed the circulation back into her hands and looked at the aftermath spread around them. "You certainly took your time getting here," she said quietly, a small smile crossing her lips despite everything. "Had to let the light settle right," Samuel replied. But the story did not close there on that scorched field. As Samuel helped Clara to her feet, something caught his eye in Denton's coat pocket, a folded piece of paper sealed in wax. He pulled it free and read it. A land deed. Not just any land deed. It bore the Whitmore Ranch parcel, signed by a local judge, with 2 witness marks that were fresh, crooked, and bore the unmistakable look of having been purchased for the price of a bottle of rye. The abduction had never been about revenge. That realization settled over Samuel like cold iron. Revenge is ugly, but at least it follows human feeling. This was something worse. This was legal paperwork dressed in violence. This was a judge using outlaws the way a carpenter uses a nail, as a means to an end. Clara stared at the deed, and for the first time that afternoon, true fear crossed her face. Not for herself, for the land her husband had died to protect. Samuel turned back to Denton. "Who hired you?" Denton's eyes flickered north. He said nothing. "I am running very short on patience today," Samuel said evenly. "Judge Harlan," Denton blurted. "He said if we got her to put her name on the transfer, we'd get a cut of the railroad contract money." Samuel's jaw went to stone. The railroad was pushing through the valley, and Judge Harlan was not acting alone. There was another name attached to this, a man Samuel did not yet know, a professional killer named Cole Raven who moved with railroad investors and left ruin behind him. He would learn that name before summer ended. Samuel looked at his sister. "Get to the wagon, Clara. Find the water." She nodded and moved without argument. She knew her brother needed to finish this in his own way. Samuel addressed the fallen men without raising his voice. "Get your men onto their horses. Where are we headed?" Denton asked. "To town," Samuel said. "You're going to have a conversation with the judge." The ride to the nearest settlement took most of the remaining daylight. It was a windswept little place at the foot of the Wichita Range, more rumor than comfort, more ambition than law. As the sun dissolved behind the hills and painted the sky in purples and burnt orange, Samuel rode drag behind the procession, his rifle across the saddle horn, looking like a relic from an older and harder world that the new one had not yet managed to bury. The Oklahoma Territory in those years was a land caught between what it had been and what it was becoming. The Great Land Rush had poured thousands of settlers into the region, all of them chasing the same dream. But for every honest family trying to build something, there was a predator in a suit. A man like Judge Harlan who understood that the fastest way to wealth was to steal what others had already bled for. When they rode into town, people stopped in the street and stared. It was not a common sight. 5 bruised and bandaged outlaws being escorted by 1 man in a trail coat and a woman in a torn ivory dress who somehow still managed to sit straight in the wagon. Samuel led them directly to the courthouse, a modest pine building that still smelled of new lumber. Inside, Judge Harlan was finishing his evening meal. He was a soft, round man with a gold watch chain draped across his vest and the practiced expression of a man who had long confused authority with entitlement. The door swung open. Samuel stepped through. The judge's fork stopped in midair. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Harlan sputtered. Samuel tossed the deed onto the table beside his dinner plate. "The meaning is that your arrangement has come apart, Judge." Harlan looked from the deed to Denton's blood-stained crew. He understood immediately that the game had turned. "But men of his type always keep one card palmed. You have no standing here," the judge sneered. "I am the law in this jurisdiction." "The law is not a title or a building," Samuel said, stepping closer. "The law is what occurs when men try to take what is not theirs and are made to account for it." Before the judge could call for anyone, Samuel took him by the collar and steered him toward the window. Outside, the town was still moving, people returning home from their fields and their shops, families gathered on porches. "Look at them," Samuel said quietly. "Every one of them came here to build something honest, not to be harvested by the men who were trusted to protect them. Samuel did not ask anyone to believe a legend. He simply passed the deed through the crowd and made Denton Cross say the judge's name out loud in the open, with witnesses standing on all sides. That was the moment the local sheriff, who had spent too long hiding behind political convenience, finally located his backbone. Judge Harlan was in custody before the last light left the sky. Clara stood beside the wagon and watched her brother from across the street. She saw the weight of it on him, the toll of stepping back into the violence he had worked so hard to leave behind. But she also saw something else, a quiet that had not been there before. Not peace exactly. Something closer to resolution. The judge was removed from his post. The outlaws were jailed. The Whitmore Ranch remained in the family. But as I sit here telling you this, I think about Samuel's face in those moments. It was not the face of a man who had won something. It was the face of a man who understood with perfect clarity that his past would never fully release him. The past does not forget the people who were good at the things it required. A lesser story would end there. But the West has a habit of keeping one more card face down on the table. That card had a name, Cole Raven. And he was already riding north. The weeks after the courthouse confrontation settled into something close to ordinary. The town looked at Samuel and Clara differently now, with a mixture of gratitude and unease that Samuel found equally uncomfortable. He returned to the ranch. He picked up his tools and went back to the work of maintaining fences and mending what the seasons had pulled apart. He wanted the smell of gun smoke gone from his clothes. He wanted mornings that began with coffee and ended with honest exhaustion. Clara stayed close. Her presence steadied him the way a good anchor steadies a ship in uncertain water. They fell into long evenings on the porch, watching stars emerge above the granite peaks. "You don't have to stay planted here on my account. Gabe," Clara said one of those evenings, using the name only she still called him. "I know part of you still hears the trail." Samuel studied the dark horizon for a long moment. "The trail goes nowhere I haven't already been," he said finally. "And every mile of it costs something you don't get back." But trouble, as he had long observed, is a heat-seeking thing. It finds the men most equipped to handle it the way fire finds dry timber. A rider arrived one morning from the south. Young, barely 20, his horse pushed to its limit and his face hollowed out by something close to real fear. "Are you Samuel Whitmore?" the boy asked. Samuel did not look up from the harness he was conditioning. "Depends entirely on what brings you asking." "The Rangers sent me," the boy said, trying to catch his breath. "There's a crew coming up out of Red River country. They're burning settlements as they go. Not my concern," Samuel said. "They're led by a man named Cole Raven." Samuel's hands went still on the leather. Cole Raven was a different category of problem altogether. This was not a land speculator with hired muscle. This was a professional, a train robber and killer who operated without sentiment and left communities in ruin behind him purely as a matter of convenience. "They're moving toward the northern railhead," the boy continued. "Everything in their path is going to ash." Samuel looked at his sister in the doorway. She did not speak. She did not need to. They had known each other long enough that the conversation happened without words. He exhaled slowly, set down the harness, and stood. His knees and back reminded him of his years. "Get that horse some water, son," he said, and walked inside. From beneath the bed, he pulled an old traveling trunk. The serape was inside, folded and flat. The gun belts were coiled beside it. The long-barreled Winchester lay across the bottom. He checked the action of each revolver. The mechanical click sounded in the silence of that room, like the turning of something inevitable. Clara appeared in the doorway. For a moment, she looked less like the composed widow on the sandstone shelf, and more like the girl he had carried across a flooded creek when she was 6 years old. Time performs that particular trick on the people we love most. It peels back the years without warning. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "Come back this time," she said. Her voice was barely steady. Samuel leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. "I always do, little sister." The ride north toward the railhead passed through a landscape in transformation. Telegraph wire was being strung between poles that had not existed 5 years prior. New fencing cut across ranges that had once run without boundary. The Old West was in its final chapter, and men like Cole Raven were its last violent punctuation. When Samuel reached the railhead settlement, the place had the look of a town that had already accepted defeat. The sheriff had taken a bullet and was laid up at the doctor's. The deputies had barricaded themselves in the livery. Raven's crew occupied the main saloon, drinking and waiting for the night train and the payroll it carried. Samuel did not wait for reinforcements. He did not draw up a strategy on paper. He rode his horse straight down the center of the main street at a deliberate, unhurried pace. The hoofbeats rang against the boardwalks. He stopped in front of the saloon. Lantern light spilled through the windows and painted the dirt gold. "Raven!" he called out. The noise inside cut off completely, the way sound dies when a room full of people suddenly holds its breath. A tall man with a dark beard and the cold, flat eyes of someone who viewed other people as obstacles stepped through the door. He looked Samuel over and smiled without warmth. "So the ghost is real after all," Cole Raven said. "I had my doubts." "No need for doubt now," Samuel replied. "You are considerably far from home, Whitmore," Raven said. His hand drifted near the heavy revolver on his hip. "I am precisely where I need to be," Samuel said. What happened at that railhead became the kind of story that passed between old men and low voices, never the way young men wanted to hear it told. It was not graceful. It was not cinematic. It was dirt and confusion and the particular terror of trying to think clearly when the world around you has gone to chaos. Samuel used the water trough for cover. His first 2 shots took out the lanterns inside and plunged the saloon into disorder. Raven's men, suddenly unable to see their target, fired in the wrong directions and into each other's panic. By the time the street went silent, the gang had dissolved, some down, some fled, and Cole Raven himself had taken his last gamble. Old men do not tell that part of the story with satisfaction. They tell it quietly because every gunfight leaves residue on the man who walked through it, regardless of which side he stood on. Even in the frontier's hardest years, a weapon was supposed to be the final answer to a question you had exhausted every other option trying to resolve. Samuel stood in the middle of that street when it was over. His breathing was even. His expression was unreadable. He did not accept congratulations. He did not stop for a drink. He holstered his revolvers, turned his horse around, and pointed it back toward the Wichita Mountains. He had done what the moment required. He had protected people who were not yet safe enough to protect themselves. When he rode back into the ranch yard, Clara was waiting on the porch steps. She saw the new mark on his jaw. She saw the way he moved, careful and tired in a way that went deeper than the body. But she also saw something behind his eyes that she had not seen in years. Not peace, not exactly, but something like purpose that had found its proper shape. He was not simply a man who had been good with guns anymore. He was something the territory needed more and had fewer of every passing season. Time moved forward the way it always does, indifferent to legend. The Oklahoma Territory became a state in 1907. The Wichita Mountains were designated a federal reserve. The granite peaks that had witnessed outlaws and dust and the creak of a widow's wagon became a destination for families on holiday. But if you go there on a still afternoon, when the sun is sitting heavy and copper over the ridgeline, there are those who say you can still hear a wagon wheel complaining over dry stone, still see a shape against the sky, a man in a faded serape who became part of the landscape as surely as the rock itself. Samuel Whitmore lived out his remaining years on that ranch. He helped Clara raise her children. He never lifted his guns in anger again, but he never let them gather rust either. He believed a man had an obligation to be ready, even if readiness never required him to act. He told the young ones stories from the old days. He never made the violence sound appealing. He made it sound like what it was, costly, permanent, and rarely as clean as the stories made it seem. He told them that a man's true measure was not in what his hands could do, but in whether his word meant something when it would have been easier to let it mean nothing. Samuel Whitmore died at 83 years old. On a warm night in summer, in his own bed, with the window open to the sound of the valley. They buried him on the hillside above the ranch, looking out over the land his sister's husband had given his life to protect, and that Samuel had twice ridden back into danger to preserve. There was no monument. Just a granite field marker, simple and honest. It read, Samuel Whitmore. He held the line. And that, my friends, is the true shape of the American frontier story. Not the gold. Not the glory. Not the mythology we built around fast draws and dramatic last stands. It was always about something quieter. Brothers who showed up when their family needed them. Neighbors who chose difficulty over indifference. Ordinary people who became something more than ordinary because the moment asked it of them and they answered. Carry something of Samuel's character with you today. The world has always needed people willing to hold the line, and it needs them no less now than it did then. Now, before you go, tell me this. Was Samuel Whitmore a dangerous man? Or was he simply a decent man whom circumstances kept making dangerous? Leave your answer below. I read every one. If this story left something with you, a little grit, a little stillness, a little resolve, give it a like and subscribe. There are more stories waiting just past the next ridgeline. Until then, keep your words solid, keep your people close, and take care of the ones still counting on you. Good night, and God bless.